most American Jews, and perhaps even more so Jewish intellectuals, have remained liberals, and most of them did support Obama for president. But I just want to emphasize, to say that the neoconservatism as a Jewish movement is not some discovery on my part. It's what their supporters and what the neoconservatives themselves admit, and it's quite an obvious fact. Now, I might want to say, when I talk about neoconservatives, I'm mentioning a network of individuals, but some of the leading figures that were involved in the Bush administration, or at least have been pretty prevalent in the media, include Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, Scooter Libby, Richard Pearl, Norman Podhoretz, Bill Kristol. Now, as I show in my work, the neoconservatives had, or actually continue to have, a strong network of think tanks and media outlets. By the end of the 1990s, the neoconservatives had developed a complete blueprint for remaking the Middle East by military means, and they intended to start with Iraq. The problem they faced was how to transform their agenda into official United States policy, because the neocons were generally not in the Clinton administration. So it was only becoming an influential part of the George W. Bush administration in 2001 that they would actually be in a position to implement their agenda. And the neocons were essentially brought into the administration by Vice President Dick Cheney. Now, many people perceive Cheney as an oil man, and perhaps to some extent he is, but in the 1990s, he was also closely tied to the neoconservatives. Now, even though he brought the neoconservatives into the Bush administration, they really didn't gain an upper hand in formulating American Middle East policy until after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. When the Bush administration looked for a plan to deal with terrorism, the neocons had an existing one to offer, and a network inside and outside of the government to promote it. Of course, their focus would be on Iraq and other enemies of Israel, not simply Al-Qaeda, which of course committed the terrorist attacks. Now, I might emphasize that the neoconservatives' promotion of the war in Iraq from within the Bush administration was crucial to its implementation, because there was strong resistance to this policy from the military, from the CIA, and from the State Department bureaucracy. The neoconservatives played a major role in promoting the bogus intelligence on the weapons of mass destruction, and also Saddam Hussein's alleged connections to Osama bin Laden. These efforts on their part, and the fear of the general American population of additional attacks, the anger of the American people that something had to be done against America's Arab and Islamic enemies, and many Americans really didn't know the difference between Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, Well, it was in this charged atmosphere that the neocons' agenda was able to win significant popular and congressional support. Now, as I point out in my book, much of the neoconservative agenda on the Middle East can be seen to have originated with right-wing Israelis, that is, the Likudniks. Moreover, the Israeli government of Ariel Sharon worked in tandem with the neoconservatives in promoting the war in Iraq and the later militant policies against Iran and Syria. I might say Sharon's successor, Olmert, also worked to some extent with the neoconservatives, but to a much lesser extent. He was more moderate than was Ariel Sharon, and the neocons were quite dissatisfied with him, especially in 2006, when he failed to push the Israeli invasion into Lebanon as hard as the neocons wanted. They actually expected that invasion to bring in Syria and Iran that would enable the United States to become involved in the war. Now, the overarching goal of the neoconservatives and the Likudniks was to create an improved geostrategic environment for Israel by weakening Israel's enemies. Now, when I say this, I don't mean that the neoconservatives intentionally wanted to help Israel at the expense of the United States. But it's apparent that the neoconservatives view American Middle East policy through the lens of Israeli security interest. Now, the goal of this neocon Likudnik strategy was not simply to weaken Israel's external enemies, but by so doing to weaken the internal threat faced by Israel from the Palestinians. Now, the Palestinian threat to Israel is a demographic threat. Israel's a Jewish state. The Palestinians are held in a subordinate position even within Israel, and also they're in a very subordinate state on the West Bank and Gaza. If it were joined together in one state, it couldn't be a Jewish state because there'd be too many Palestinians who would be opposed to it. If, in fact, there's a separate state on the West Bank and Gaza that's really independent, they would siphon the separate Palestinian state, could be a security threat, but perhaps more importantly, which is not mentioned by the Western media, they would use resources that Israel currently exploits. For example, Israel now controls the major aquifer on the West Bank for its water supply. If the Palestinians really had full access to their own aquifer, there really wouldn't be enough water for Israel to maintain its irrigation system for heavy agriculture. Israelis wouldn't be able to live a Western lifestyle with swimming pools, regular baths, things of that sort. They would be reduced like the Palestinians, who today just sort of drink dirty water, really can't take many baths. It's a third world standard of living. Israel, if it shared that water, their standard of living would deteriorate, and this would be a very serious blow to the Jewish state, because probably many Jews would, if their standard of living were lessened, were weakened, they would leave Israel and move to the West, which would undermine the whole Zionist experiment.